All right, thank you all for coming to our author talk for our March-April On the Same Page selection, Yours for the Taking by Gabrielle Korn. On the Same Page is our longest running campaign. It's a bi-monthly citywide read. Throughout the 2 months, we encourage all of San Francisco to read and engage with the selected work. Our Readers Advisory team works to select the titles. We're looking for things like literary merit, with the goal of connecting to the community and sparking engagement. Author Gabrielle Korn and Audrey T. Williams will be discussing Gabrielle's gripping and incisive dystopian novel set in 2050, Yours for the Taking, when climate change has rendered the outside world virtually uninhabitable. Survival is guaranteed only to those accepted to the Inside Project, massive weather-safe structures funded by corporate sponsors and built atop the ruins of cities. Gabrielle Korn is the author of 3 books and former editor-in-chief of Nylon Media. Her debut memoir, Everybody Else is Perfect, was named the #1 LGBTQ+ book of the year by Oprah Magazine and the best Jewish memoir of the year by Hey Alma. Her second book, the dystopian science fiction novel Yours for the Taking, was an indie next pick and a New York Times Best Book of the Month. Its recent sequel, The Shutouts, has been called another winner by Publishers Weekly and a perfect blend of sadness and hope by Kirkus. Her writing has appeared across the internet for 15 years with bylines in Elle, McSweeney's, The Millions, Literary Hub, InStyle, Refinery 29, Oprah Magazine, Autostraddle, and more, as well as several anthologies. Originally from Providence, Rhode Island, she's lived in New York for over 20 years before moving to LA with her wife, where together they run the Pink Door Artist and Writer Residency. Joining her, we have Audrey T. Williams. Audrey is a Black American and Indo-Burmese poet and wellness facilitator whose work bridges ancestral wisdom and storytelling with community healing. Literary arts and speculative fiction serve as her medicine, inspiring her Words for Wellness programs and forthcoming works. She holds an MFA in creative writing from California College of the Arts and is completing a certificate in narrative medicine at Columbia University. Her writing appears in Lightspeed magazine, Space and Time magazine, Amherst Writers Association Peregrine Journal, and Conjuring Words, an Afrofuturist textbook, among others. She currently resides in the San Francisco East Bay, where she lives with her husband, mother, and 2 grumpy chickens. Her current projects are a memoir about adult multiracial identity formation, a speculative flash fiction collection, and a poetry chapbook on caregiving. All right, we're going to start out with a reading from Gabrielle, and then we'll move into the conversation portion of the event, and then finally we'll have a Q&A before we announce next month's selection.
Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you so much for having me, and to you all for coming. This is so nice, and Audrey, thank you so much for doing this with me. I didn't know there were chickens. I'm going to read a little bit from the middle. Though Ava had barely slept since Orchid left, she also found she couldn't get out of bed. She knew the sun must be rising by now, but when she opened her curtains to look out the window, the sky was so smoggy it was impossible to tell. She tried to check her phone, but the battery had been drained by nonstop news alerts. She plugged it in and scanned the headlines. The announcement of who would be accepted inside had triggered wide-scale rioting. Around the world, the cities that housed insides were consumed by fighting and destruction. In New York, cars were set on fire, stores ransacked, and homes abandoned by terrified families and turned into meeting places for the military police, who appeared in lower Manhattan in enormous clusters, delivered from the sky and clad in black and yellow like a swarm of murder hornets. Crowds of people were tear-gassed, shot with rubber bullets, corralled and arrested by the hundreds. Tanks showed up on Fifth Avenue, mowing down anyone in their path. The sky turned orange with fire and then black with smoke until it became the dense gray Ava now saw out her window. Those last few days before she moved inside, she'd been hiding in her apartment, terrified of the hordes of enraged people who would not be joining her. They had nothing left to lose, so they were destroying everything. She understood their anger. If the circumstances had been different, she might have protested alongside them. Now, she couldn't help but know she was different from the people in the streets, the people who weren't selected for survival. The morning of her inside check-in, when it was finally time to go, Ava took one last look around her apartment. She'd cleaned it because it had felt important at the time. Now, though, she didn't know why she'd wasted so many of her last remaining hours in the outside world dusting and sorting. She touched her clothing to say goodbye to it, rubbing her favorite shirts between her fingers. She couldn't bring herself to look through her photos or the book of notes from Orchid she'd saved. She was still wearing the silver bracelet Orchid had gotten her several years ago, which she never took off. She didn't remove it now. When she left, she didn't bother closing the door behind her. There was no point. Besides, she thought, maybe someone who needed a home would find it. She left some canned food out on the counter just in case, along with a note, "Please take whatever you'd like." Ava took the SkyTram to Manhattan. The uprising had been quelled and the city was quiet. There weren't any other people on the automated 3-level cable car, and she chose a seat on the roof deck in the corner. As the tram creakily made its way across the East River below, she watched piles of garbage thrash in the waves. The smell was almost unbearable on the deck, dead fish mixed with sewage and salt. Hard to believe this had ever been a beautiful sight to behold. Hard to believe there'd ever been any beauty in New York at all. But she wanted to feel the wind in her face one last time, even if the air was sour. She realized she was still wearing her septum ring, and with only a moment's hesitation, she pulled it out of the small hole between her nostrils and tossed it in the river. It didn't make a splash. She wondered who she would be without all these little markers to define her. The tram arrived at the edge of Chinatown, and she refilled her water bottle at a public filtered water repository to prepare for the walk up to 34th Street, the entrance to Inside, where Penn Station used to be. She pulled her medical mask up from her neck, bending it in place around her nose. She wore athletic shorts and a tank top and was already sweating. Her hair was in a tight ponytail, but small pieces of it were sticking to her neck, and she felt itchy all over. The city was too quiet. Evidence of the rioting was everywhere. Broken glass littered the street. Burned-out cars still smelled of melting rubber and plastic. Graffiti was scrawled across boarded-up windows. "Let us in." A defaced wall read, "Inside lies." It took her an hour to walk uptown. She could have taken the electric bus, which ran on cables with or without people, but she wanted to savor her last moments outside, wanted to remember how the sun felt on her skin. Her arms began to burn, and her forehead ached from squinting. She walked by a few people who didn't look up to say hi. Even through her mask, the smell of the city was sticking to the insides of her nostrils so that every breath felt toxic. Perhaps, she thought, this really is for the best. As she walked up to the looming structure, she saw security guards in riot gear standing behind a table where a row of Inside employees were checking people in on large electronic tablets. It was a surprisingly calm scene, the backdrop of destruction holding only the ghosts of protest. A line of people had started to form. Some looked nervous, but everyone looked excited. They were all saved, after all, chosen somehow. Yet no one spoke to each other. Her phone was warm in her pocket, and she touched it absent-mindedly, even though she knew no one was trying to reach her. She wasn't even sure why she brought it. Finally, it was her turn. The woman at the table, wearing pink scrubs and a matching pink face mask, barely looked up. Name? She took Ava's fingerprint on a screen to verify her identity, and then, before she knew it, Ava was greeted by a security guard who gently took her by the elbow and guided her around the table and through a door just to the side of the massive gate. The door blended into the wall so well she hadn't even noticed it was there. With a click, it slid open. Ava stepped inside and felt her old life shedding like an old skin. She knew with the utmost clarity that this moment marked the clear divide between a before and an after, though what the after would look like was still a question mark. The door closed behind her. She didn't even hear it shut. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Where to begin? So this book it literally took my breath away. I just want to thank you so much. You bring up so many different themes. And I guess the way that I'd love to get started in our discussion today is if you could just tell us a bit, as much as you're willing, to say where the inspiration came from for this book.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's very kind. I mean, I Sometimes I feel like we never really know where inspiration comes from. With this book, I started writing it at a very specific moment in time in my life, which is I had just left a job that I thought I was going to have for a really long time. And I was feeling really disillusioned with jobs as a concept. And ideas of success and promises made to women in leadership roles in particular. And I had started to think about the idea of the lies that we were being told around what feminism was. I had been working in media through the 2010s when women's magazines decided to rebrand as feminist. And it was a really interesting shift to be a part of, because they weren't treating people any better. It was just kind of good for advertising. So I was thinking about that, and at the same time, I was starting to think about climate change in a real way. And one day, on a whim, I decided to look up what year things are going to become unlivable. If nothing changes and we allow the situation to get worse. And that year was 2050. And that felt really, really soon. And so I immediately imagined what that would mean for me, for my community. And specifically, I imagined Ava and Orchid, a queer couple living in Brooklyn, and what impending climate disaster would mean for them.
Thank you for that. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk about power. I feel like lately there's been a lot of controversy around the word power. It's okay to talk about things in terms of personal power, but not so much empowerment. Whereas I feel like in years past, it was all like, oh, women's empowerment and blah, blah, blah. So I just kind of wanted to level set and like get your take on the difference between empowerment and power.
I think, historically it's an important distinction because I think the idea of empowerment implies, people who have been disenfranchised becoming, getting power. I think the problem is empowerment tends to be so focused in on the individual being empowered. And I think people confuse it with success on behalf of the community that they belong to. And so it's like, we can empower a woman by putting her into a leadership position, but if she's not using her position to hold the door open for other people, then it's not really empowerment. It's something else. It's just more power. And I think that we tend to think about power as control. And I'm more interested in thinking about a future where we move away from power grabs in general and think about the fact that we're all connected to each other, and we will survive because of our dependence on each other, not because of our power over each other.
Okay, you're making me think of like mushrooms and mycological networks and sort of like that interdependence that happens on like more of like equanimity, I guess. And it also makes me think about the distinction between power that is used in terms of force or corruption versus like personal power. And that makes me think like maybe it's more about agency. And so let's dig into our lovely Jacqueline. Let's talk about her, right? What is her problem? What is going on with Jack? Because I will say, like, and those of you that are in the audience that have read the book, like, I was initially so happy. I was like, yes, a woman, she's going to set everything right, and Jacqueline, right? And then somehow, slowly, what happens is I'm like, wait, she's evil. Like, I'm like, wait, like, what initially was like, oh, her grandfather might have had something to do with this impending climate disaster. Here she is. She wants to fix it. She's going to make it better. Okay, talk.
I'm so glad that you fell for it.
You got me. You definitely got me.
I was wondering if people would buy into it when I was writing it, because it's hard when you know where it's headed to have a good sense of how believable it is. But yeah, I mean, she makes some points, and especially in the world of Yours for the Taking, what I imagined was because weather events have become increasingly deadly and more frequent, that we lose the rights that we've gained, whatever that is. And because of this, the women's rights movement becomes very binary and very polarized and very kind of basic. And so Jacqueline steps into this moment of women versus men, and she is not really thinking about the nuances of gender or class or race. She is thinking about herself, and she calls it feminism. And what unfolds throughout the book is that not only is it not feminism, but it's just that she thinks that she is the only kind of person who is worthy of surviving the climate apocalypse. And so she brands it really well. She calls it feminism. She says that it's on behalf of all women. But as we get to know her over the course of the book, and as we drill down into her actual vision, it's not even all women. It's just women who are as most similar to her as possible initially, and then it's like, oh, is it, or are we just filling the inside with little U's?
You got me on so many levels, because I was, again, initially I was like, oh, she's this amazing eco-feminist. And not only that, but she is so absolutely inclusive. Her inner circle is made up of a trans woman and a Black lesbian, like Olympia and Shelby. I was like, oh, she's super, she is the epitome of the ideal woke person. She's doing all the things. She has no bias whatsoever. And then I'm like, wait, the truth is she knows what to do to make it look like she's unbiased. So she's made sure that she's got one of everybody in her inner circle, so she can't be accused of anything, right? And so, yeah, I guess I was curious if you could say more about that, because in real life, I feel I live just outside Oakland, and the work that I do, with racial justice and things like that, in Oakland, I'm not so much exposed to that side, I guess, of feminism. And I'm just wondering if there's anything you can say around, anything you'd be willing to say, and you can say no, but, real life examples.
Sure. I mean, Jacqueline has her bases covered. It's a very PR-friendly approach, and I think we see a lot of that in corporate America. We see, all kinds of people from marginalized communities being popped into leadership positions to solve the problems that the company has created. And it's this very kind of surface level approach to diversity that never works, because those people are not set up to succeed in any way. They're just there to be outward facing and to prove a point on behalf of whoever's above them. So that's what I was thinking about with how Jacqueline approaches things. Of course she would need a Black lesbian and a trans woman, because she's not racist and she's not transphobic. Look who she has as her right and left hands. And then you learn everything you need to know about her by how she treats those two people once she gets what she wants from them.
Exactly, yeah. And then there's a point, I think it's when she's first recruiting Olympia, and Olympia's agreed to be her medical director. And there's a line about how the power is sort of cascading down from Jacqueline directly into Olympia. And it's the power fills Olympia up. I mean, thankfully, she doesn't run with it in the way that Jacqueline does. But it makes me think about how sometimes when we're part of a group or identify as a group that has been historically oppressed, and then we get power, how that can go to people's heads, right? And it makes me think, I don't know if you saw the movie Snowpiercer, but it's like not in the TV show, but in the movie at least, like the oppressed class, like they're literally moved to the caboose of the train, they're held back, and like they fight, they make their way to the front of the train, they get the power, and as soon as he gets the power, what does he do? He turns around and uses that same like hierarchical oppression against the other people, right, that he just came from. And it makes me think about other, like my personal favorite dystopian or tales of oppression, like I think of George Orwell, Animal Farm, where the animals successfully thwart the humans, kick them off the farm, and then what do? The pigs turn around and like they oppress the other animals. And so I'm thinking in your book, it made me think with Jacqueline, it's like her whole thing is like the root of all evil is patriarchy. And so cis men are not going to be allowed. But then what does she do? Like she turns around and ends up being this totally narcissistic, dictatorial woman herself. And I really want to congratulate you because you led up to it so slowly, right? And the nuances in all of your main characters, like whether it's Ava or Olympia or Shelby, like there were just nuances that you did. So I really wanted to applaud you. And I was curious, writer to writer, if there's anything you could say about how you were able to build in that level of complexity and nuance.
Wow, thank you. It took many drafts, honestly. I, for some insane reason, decided to write this without outlining it first. So I tried every way possible to tell this story. You know, like the first time I wrote it, I didn't separate out the different characters into different chapters. I had everybody together all the time. And then I tried telling it starting at the beginning and working my way backwards. Truly, I have 40 different versions of this book. Oh my goodness. I really don't recommend doing that. But over the course of rewriting it so many times, I think I figured out the pacing of unveiling her depths of, you know, all of her things.
Yeah. So I have to ask, knowing that your first book was the memoir, would you say that on some level this is what they call autofiction? Or no?
No. I think there's an emotional truth to it, you know, in the way that all fiction is true emotionally.
Right.
But no, this is definitely not autofiction.
Okay. One of the themes, I mean, there's so many themes that you're able to touch on in this book, like from mental health to gender roles, gender dynamics, power dynamics. I'm like, where do we want to go? There's so many questions that I could ask. But I think the one theme that really resonated with me most was that it seemed most of the characters, what they really wanted was love. Right? I was just wondering if you could speak to sort of that motivation and like, is that accurate or is that just me like wishful thinking, projecting?
No, it's true. They're all seeking love and connection and solace in each other. And even Jacqueline is desperately seeking the love of a daughter who, you know, she has no real right to. But like we see flashes of her very lonely upbringing, which you know, are mirrored in Ava's upbringing. And yeah, I mean, they're all kind of either heading towards each other or away from each other. But to me, this is a book about relationships more than anything.
It is, and one of the things that really stood out again to me was in those relationships, in those interpersonal dynamics, you make each character make very difficult decisions. Like to me, I call these the Walking Dead decisions. It's like literally like life or death, right? So the choice of like, you got into the inside, but your parents didn't get in, your siblings didn't get in. Like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna stay, like try to stick it out here on the outside? And of course you're not, right? Like your parents are like, you're young, you know, you have your whole life, like you should go, right? And so you have people making those kinds of decisions. Where do I want to go with that? I had so many, like, I had 3 different questions that I wanted to ask you about that. But I guess just, could you say more about how did you come up with those resolutions, those moments where people sort of have to choose between their own individual personal safety and survival versus that interconnectedness with family members and with their inner circle lovers sometimes, like in the case of, Orchid and Ava having to separate. Like, how did you come up with that?
Oh, who knows? I mean, basically, like in the first section, everybody's on the outside. And by the second section, I needed to get everybody where they were going to be for the rest of the book. And not one single character chooses someone else over their own survival. Yeah. Except in a way, Orchid, who didn't really have a choice. They all choose themselves for all very different but very valid reasons. And I was thinking about survival and the things that we do and sacrifice to survive, and the different places that different kinds of people would have access to. And something I was thinking about a lot and continue to think about is the way climate survival is a class issue.
People have said until it affects the uber rich, then nothing's going to be done. I've heard that.
Totally. And how much money you have informs what you can survive. And so the choices these characters make are also based on their resources and what they have access to. And so a character like Shelby, who is from a working class family who doesn't have a lot of financial resources, gets offered the chance to survive on the space shuttle. And it's like, how is she gonna turn that down and choose to head into the wilderness with her family? Like, given everything she's already survived as a trans woman in an America where the only place she can live is New York.
Also, how prescient were you to know that women would be going up in space shuttles, like right now?
Girl.
You planned that. I know you planned that.
Yeah, I paid them to do it.
So one of the things I want to be conscious of time, because there's so many layers that we could unpack. But one of the things that comes up, as I think I mentioned before, like the idea of ecofeminism. Like my initial hope was that Jacqueline was going to be this awesome, like positive, girl boss, eco-feminist. But one of the very real things that I think in real life that people are dealing with is climate depression, and the whole idea that there's a lot of mental health awareness now around the ecological collapse, and people are having mental health issues around that. And I just wondered if there's anything that you wanted to say, like around that, or if that was something that you were aware of, or has that, maybe that has happened more so since the book has even come out.
Yes, completely. And I'm so glad you asked about this. So this book is based on a worst case scenario climate breakdown. And I think it's important to know the facts before spiraling into despair. And so basically, climate scientists say that we have to cut our total global carbon emissions in half by 2030 to avoid the kind of climate change that we can't survive, which is what happens in this book. So obviously, we no longer have a federal government interested in meeting that goal. Which means more than ever, every single thing we do makes a difference. And I think the tendency, and I completely understand the inclination to give up, to feel like, well, they're not going to stop drilling. If anything, they're going to drill more. They're going to use more fossil fuels. That means like, oh, well, like we're screwed, that's it. But actually, that just means it falls on us even more. And I really do have to believe that if we do things as a collective and at scale, that we can make a difference. So things like if you own your home, switching to an electric stove or solar power in general, using public transportation, shopping secondhand, those things do count. Everything counts. And I think climate anxiety tends to make people feel like nothing counts and nothing matters, and it's the opposite. And I think like the most important thing to me is a mindset shift around the fact that there's anything different between you and someone who lives in a place that's being destroyed by climate change.
Right.
In the same way that we know from social justice thinking that none of us are free until we're all free.
Exactly.
If some of us can't survive climate change, then none of us can. And I think we have to think about it like that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I was going to bring up the topic of climate refugees, which you touched on a little bit. And you also, that's sort of a segue into the next question I had, which was, what would you love for your readers' takeaway to be? Like, what, and I work in an ad agency, and we always are like, okay, what do we want people to think, feel, and do? Like, what would be your ideal for your readers? Like, what would you want them to walk away thinking, feeling, and doing? You kind of answered that a bit, but just wanted to see if there's any other points to make.
I mean, I want them to feel moved, and I want them to feel like this is a planet worth fighting for, and that we have to do it together. Like, I want to inspire people with the love between the characters to fight for our planet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to make sure that before we turn to our audience Q&A, that we have a chance to talk about the next book, the sequel, the Shutouts, because I was able to be part of a little bit of book club discussions that have happened around Yours for the Taking. And I have to say, pretty consistently, folks were like, I wanted more. It ended too soon. And so thankfully there is a sequel, because I was like, I have questions. Like, I need to understand, like, what, I get the inside. I need to know the outside. So thankfully the Shutouts is coming. And what without too much, too many spoilers, what would you like to tell us about the sequel?
Yeah, well, it's out now. It came out in December. I think it's a better book.
Oh.
I don't know. I feel like I learned how to write a novel by writing Yours for the Taking. And then with the Shutouts, I was like, oh, I got this. I know how to do this. No, just kidding. But
no, you're not.
I feel like once I wrote the Shutouts, it became impossible for me to think about Yours for the Taking on its own, because it works as both a prequel and a sequel. And so it has two storylines, and one of the storylines, which is very personal to the character, also explains how the world of Yours for the Taking came to be, and then the second timeline picks up right where this leaves off. So the questions are answered on a character level, but also on a world level.
Okay, great, because that was my main thing. I was like, how did we let it get this bad? Like, how did Brooklyn turn into Brook? Like, I need to understand, like, it sounds, the way you described, like, all the storms and everything that happened to the East Coast and, like, Manhattan, I'm just like, wait, I was just in Manhattan. Like, I can't, there must have been, like, such devastation, and so I'm happy to know that there's more. And let's see. Before we turn it over to any audience Q&A, is there anything else that you want to say? I mean, I want to applaud, like, on a literary level, like the craft, like even the piece that you read, there's a line in there about how the military police are, like, delivered from the sky, like, wearing black and yellow, like, murder hornets. And I was just like, okay, way to throw a nature metaphor in there. Like,
thank you.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, is there anything else that I haven't asked that you would like to speak to before we turn it over to audience Q&A?
I don't know. I think you covered it.
No.
I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to thank you again. Thank you for being here. And I believe afterwards we're going to do a signing. Is that right? So people have a chance to get their copy signed by you. And it's great to know the sequel is also available. So, yeah, I think that's all that we had. And we were going to turn it over to audience Q&A. If there's any questions.
All right, yeah, we are ready for audience Q&A. So if you have some questions, just raise your hand and we'll come over to you with a mic.
Thank you for coming. I just want to say I read both of the books, so I don't want to give any spoilers, but I'm curious, before you wrote both of them, did you have like the whole outline for both of them? Because they are connected, like you said, and of course I read both, and I know this, but before you wrote either of them, did you have like the outline for both of them already so that we can see the connections? Because you mentioned stuff in Yours for the Taking that obviously I saw in the next book. So just curious how you laid this all out before you even wrote them.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. It was more like there were things that I mentioned in Yours for the Taking that when I mentioned them, I could imagine the whole life of them. Like there's a character's mother is described in a tiny paragraph in Yours for the Taking, and when I wrote it, I saw her whole life, and that ended up being about half of the Shutouts. So little things like that, but it wasn't super planned moving from book to book. It was more just like things I wrote that I hoped I would get to expand on, and then when it came time to write the Shutouts, the truth is I had so little time to write it that I needed to outline it really intensely because I didn't have time to go through 40 drafts. So that one was very planned out, but not before Yours for the Taking was finished.
Hello. Thank you so much. Gabrielle, I'm a huge fan of your writing, so thank you for being here. But I haven't read them yet, so thanks for the no spoilers. I find it really interesting that you wrote a fiction dystopian novel, but with very clear, very real through lines of social justice woven in. And I also feel really inspired by that. So I was just curious if you could speak a little bit to how you held the balance between the world you were making up and then the very real themes that Audrey touched on in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad you feel inspired. This is a hard one because I don't think that, like, as authors, we can be super intentional about things like genre and theme. Like, I mean, at least for me, it's a feeling like the story exists already, and I just have to try to write it down in a way that communicates what I know about it. And I think the social justice elements were just baked in from the story and from the characters and because of what was going on in the world. I wish I had been more intentional about it, but it was impossible to separate the greater points of the book from what was happening to the characters who were just voices inside my head. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Well, I just want to make a comment off of that. I noticed in the back of the book the genre that it's listed under is lesbian fiction, and I thought, well, yes, but also climate fiction, science fiction, speculative fiction. Like, I was just curious, as an author, do you have any say in that, or is that the publishers decide, or how does that get decided?
Oh, I had no say in it. Yeah, I mean, marketing is interesting. And I mean, I can keep talking about that. To me, like, the book is supposed to be funny. There are a lot of satirical elements to it, and so I think it's hard with genre when you call something science fiction or dystopian fiction. Like, it makes it sound so serious, and it is a serious book. But there were also certain moments that I pushed towards the ridiculous instead of towards the realistic, because sometimes you just have to laugh.
Yeah. But now it's dark humor because so much of it has come true.
I know, unfortunately.
Well, I have questions if no one else does. I could keep going. I was trying to be nice. Okay. So, again, writer to writer, as an emerging speculative author, I have questions. I'd love to hear about your path to publication, knowing that your first and previous book was a memoir, so it was nonfiction, right? So how did this come to be? Like, can you talk a little about that path? Like, did you write the book and then query or get an agent, or how did the whole thing happen?
Yeah, great question. I got really lucky in that my literary agent found me. I was writing so much for the internet that she reached out, and and that's how the first book, which was a book of essays, came to be. And I felt really proud of it. but it also felt like it was just an extension of everything I had already been doing online. And I had always wanted to write fiction, you know, like it had been a lifelong dream that got put on the back burner because I needed to work. And it was really hard for me to imagine when I was younger what it would be like to make a living writing fiction. Like I had no model or image of what that would be. And then my first book came out and I realized if I don't write the kind of book I want to write, I'm just not going to write it. Yeah. Like it's not just going to like be manifested by virtue of wishing for it. So I started writing it. We took it out. You know, you only need one yes was something I said to myself a lot while the book was going out. And I was so fortunate to find an editor who got the vision completely and was completely on board. And she ended up buying the sequel to it before it came out, which was awesome. I turned this in and then tried to write something else, and she was basically like, look, like what I really want is a sequel. Like, please just do that. So it was as far as paths to publication go, it was one that I feel very fortunate for.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that a lot of times nonfiction agents or memoir agents won't also represent speculative, so
Right.
that was a blessing, right?
Totally, and she was so supportive and such a champion of the book. The publisher who put out my memoir wasn't interested in it, which was fine, you know, like it's a different thing.
Sure.
So I had the opportunity to go to St. Martin's Press, and they've been amazing. It's such a great team over there, and so many of the people who have worked on the book with me have been queer, which has been amazing because I feel like, you know, as many queer people can touch it,
Yes.
you know, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So we do have another audience question.
Hi. I think it was such a good idea to have climate change and social justice being those like the main themes of the book, because they are kind of the main themes of our world right now. So I thought it was cool to bring them together in that way. I know that I feel like I was supposed to get that the inside didn't work, but I also felt like they were there for 20 years and it was working for them for 20 years. And there were a lot of like really positive things. I think if they were living in their the bubble basically, and they were getting along pretty well until they found out the truth. And then they decided that wasn't working. But I was curious if that's how you see it. Do you feel like I guess my question is, what in your mind didn't work about Inside?
That's such a good question. Thank you. I think what didn't work about it was that people didn't consent to the circumstances of it. You know, like in order to get them to fall in line, they were drugged. And they were being experimented on, and to Audrey's word, they didn't have any agency. So I think the success of it depends on how you view success. Like, is success just survival? Because in that case, then yeah, like they made it 20 years without anybody dying, which in Jacqueline's metrics was successful and was amazing. And they prevented the issues that were happening at the other insides, which was that rape and other violence became endemic. And I think, the way I wanted to conclude it is that like there's still hope, especially for this inside, that they can move away from Jacqueline's leadership and take the best parts of her legacy and kind of redefine it with a more horizontal leadership structure and keep trying. Like it's not like we end and everybody goes outside. Like they're still in there. They're still having children. So it is successful in that way. And I think the question is like, can this population heal from what's been done to them and avoid repeating the mistakes of their founder?
I have a question that kind of tacks onto that question. Do you think if Jacqueline had been upfront with everyone who applied for her inside, people would have made the same choices?
Some. I think for a lot of people, it would be a really appealing bet. Like, oh, there are no men and we get to do drugs. And I think, for other people, that would sound terrible.
That reminds me of a question that I had, and sometimes my brain just like really reaches, but I guess my question is around like what your inspirations might have been, because one of the thoughts that I had, and again, this is probably just me reaching, but I thought about Margaret Atwood, Handmaid's Tale, the ways in which women were reduced to their reproductive organs, and so men were, in my mind, reduced to just their reproductive potential of their sperm. And so I just wondered if you've read Atwood, if Handmaid's Tale, or like if you could speak to what your literary inspirations might have been that might have somehow even subconsciously led to the storyline.
Totally. And I mean, Atwood is a master of her craft, and The Handmaid's Tale was, did have a big influence on me. But that book, as with most literature that is feminist dystopia or utopia, it does become very kind of like gender essentialist, and it does kind of simplify things to fit the plot. And I wanted to write a feminist dystopia where people weren't defined by what was between their legs in the way that it would in an Atwood book, honestly.
Yes, yeah.
And she was ahead of her time in a lot of ways, but in a lot of other ways, I think she fell into the same traps as the canon of her genre, which is, sex is assigned at birth, and everything stems from that moment.
Right, yeah. And also, I mean, you couldn't have known, like we said, like you couldn't have known, like women were going up in the space shuttle today, like there's these ways that I just wanted to call out, like everyone's rereading Parable of the Sower and talking about how prescient it is, but I'm just really sort of amazed at the prescience that's in this book as well. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, the Girl Bosses in Space news, just like, it does feel like a natural extension of everything that has happened. Right. It's like, thank you, I appreciate it. And it's also like, if you pay attention to what the billionaires are saying and like the things they believe and the power that they have to make their beliefs come true, it's like, there's such an emphasis on having as many children as possible and space. And they're really interested in figuring out how to leave the planet and colonize other planets, and letting everybody else die out and having just blah blah blah. And so it's like if you read their interviews and just kind of like take one step further and think about like what that would start to look like, it's like, oh, okay, so there's 5 years from now, like there's 10, and so it was like that combined with honestly just the climate reports on the UN website. Like it's not that hard to learn what's coming. I don't always recommend it.
Oh, there we have one more, Lori.
Did you find someone that might have been a model for Jacqueline in your magazine work?
You don't have to answer that.
Whatever do you mean? She is certainly inspired by people I have known in various industries. Certainly media, but also the corporate world in general, I think, tends to attract Jacqueline-like figures.
Hi. Yeah, I had one question. I love the book. I just finished it this afternoon, actually. So I had a question about the children of Inside and how they grew up. And I think it was really interesting was like, you touched upon how they were like, in this really safe environment and they were coddled and they grew up to have more anxiety and depression or other issues. And I just wanted to get your view on how important it is to have conflict in your life as you're growing up and how you thought about the children in Inside.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. Totally. So I don't have kids. I don't know anything about raising kids, but I do know that it's really important for children to figure out how to be okay without someone making things okay for them. And I think that when you take that experience away from children by over-managing their lives and preventing them from experiencing conflict, that they don't learn that they can be okay in those moments. And I think that makes people feel very anxious. And I think it's just so important that we learn for ourselves that we can take care of ourselves, even with our parents, like right over there, you know, like I think it's such an important part of life. And so that's what Inside gets wrong. Like, there's this fantasy that if you make everything really, really safe, it'll bring out the best in people. And instead, it creates a generation with kind of this outsized amount of fear.
They were literally sheltered.
They were too
right?
sheltered.
The most sheltered
Yeah.
children of all time.
Yeah.
Is there a question?
Thank you. I was just curious because you mentioned how your sequel, you had to write very quickly. So how do you feel now? Like, are you feeling a little burnt out from writing? Do you have something planned in the works? What do you got going on?
Oh, thank you for asking. No, unfortunately, never burnt out from writing. I feel like I've written so many books since Yours for the Taking came out. Yeah, I mean, I have so much that I want to do. I don't think I'm going to be staying within speculative fiction in my next book, which hopefully I'll be allowed to talk about soon. But yeah, there's a lot more to come. I love writing more than I love doing anything for money. So my goal right now is basically just trying to like orient my life around supporting my writing so that I can keep doing it instead of like doing it in the mornings and at night like I used to. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Gabrielle and Audrey, for the wonderful conversation and answering all of our questions. I'm really appreciate that you were able to come out with us today. I do have a few announcements. I want to thank the audience too for showing up. And I want to announce our May-June selection for On the Same Page is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. She'll be coming for an author talk here in Corrette on June 14th, and then we'll have our virtual book club on June 24th. Copies of Light from Uncommon Stars should be available at your branch libraries in the beginning of May. And then finally, I really would appreciate it if you could share your thoughts about this program. And some of you may win a free copy of either, I have a few copies of the Shutouts or copies of our next On the Same Page selection. You can scan the QR code and answer the quick survey or type in the short link. And again, thank you all for coming. There will be book sales and book signing in the lobby.
Thank you so much.